Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing?
All good.
Terrific, Hanny.
So if you could just all say a very brief words about who you are and what you do, and then we can get into the conversation. So do you want to start with Gint, just because that's where you are on my screen?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm Gint Atkinson. I head up network strategy and digital architecture with SES Satellites.
Okay, Justin?
Yeah, I'm Justin Vedland from Analysys Mason, and I work in the cloud practice group. We look at infrastructure and technologies associated with cloud.
Moshe?
Hi, Moshe Shimon. I'm working at Amdocs. I'm leading the product management team for open networks, dealing with 5G, OSS, and orchestration solutions.
And Rick?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Lievano. I'm the CTO for the worldwide Telco group at Microsoft.
Well, welcome all of you. So when we had our discussion previously, we thought it might be a good idea to approach this topic on what's near and big. And so let's start with what's near and big. Justin, I think this is your thing, talking about how telcos are moving away from hosting and selling off data centers, and what are they doing next?
Yeah, well, there's a move afoot. It's early days, but people are doing it in terms of moving from their internal IT infrastructure to cloud-based ones. We heard a bit about that earlier on with Rakuten, for example. There's a shift which is going on there. The implementation of cloud-native technologies, which are enabling to do that. And so, and particularly some of the North American operators have been very vocal in their shift to public cloud platforms opposed to using internal ones. And in that process, of course, they're disposing of some of their own data centers and that activity. Primarily, this has been sort of BSS orientated, but of course, it's increasingly they're doing it with OSS, and the implications for that, of course, are far more stringent. And so, essentially, this is a shift. Is it a complete shift or sort of completed in terms of its activity? Well, no, not yet. We're sort of part of a journey, and obviously, there's going to be some time scales associated with this move over. But nonetheless, it seems pretty obvious that a lot of this IT infrastructure will shift over in the next few years, but there'll be some still staying on-premise for a number of reasons, which I'm quite sure we'll cover in this discussion.
Rick, do you think on-premise is with us forever?
So ever since we announced Azure back in 2008, Annie, we always made it very clear that hybrid and on-prem would play a role. There are just certain workloads that just by physics alone don't lend themselves to being hosted in a hyperscale data center that's hundreds of miles away. So that hasn't changed. So our plan is to continue investing on edge. We've made a number of edge announcements over the past year. We've continued to improve edge capabilities, many of them which are targeted directly at carriers. So for example, Azure Edge Zones with Carrier are one of the offerings that we have there. I think the big change though is that we're bringing in cloud native technologies to on-prem, to the private cloud, right? So you can actually develop, build, deploy your application at the edge on-prem just as you would in the public cloud, no difference, right? The edge really just becomes a deployment target. And that's the biggest shift that we're seeing now. With regards to what's next for telcos, what's the future? Absolutely right, Justin. A lot of the major data centers that they have are just being sliced. There's just no need for telcos to run those types of services anymore. However, a lot of that has moved to the edge, right? So a lot of capabilities that telcos have today could certainly benefit from the edge. And we kind of think that the edge has become maybe their new hosting business, right? Because every hyperscaler wants a spot in a carrier POP, right? There's a lot of value in having that proximity to our shared customers, right? So that's a huge opportunity for telcos moving forward.
Okay, so Moshe, if I could come to you. Amdocs is sitting in an interesting place, or I should say perhaps not sitting so much as straddling. The move to OSS, as Justin alluded to, is quite a big scary move for a lot of operators, but they know that for some workloads they need to do it, and your job is kind of taking the pain away and doing integration and offering various facilities. Could you explain a bit about what your offer is and what you do before we come to talk about Gint's particular case study, please?
So first of all, we are in Amdocs, we are, let's say, handling, let's say, two parts. One part is because we are a vendor and we are deploying and we have the OSS solutions and the product for the orchestration. So what we see a trend of customers that used to have those IT systems that are sitting on-prem in their private cloud, and they are now willing to shift it and asking us to shift it and help them to this kind of transition to the public cloud and adapt the public cloud services. And we just also announced a cooperation with Azure. And we are helping them with, this is the first transition, that everything can be done in the public cloud. It's helping them with the elasticity. It's helping them with with the operational point, with managing and reducing, at the end of the day, their TCOs over the time. So this is one part, and we did this deployment and we'll elaborate it in SES as a reference and others. So this is the first part. The second part is after we are now running in the public cloud, the expectation is that the orchestration system and the OSS systems will run natively in the public cloud, not just as a lift and shift, really gaining all the benefits of the services and the things that the public clouds are bringing. Some of them is just, for example, manage the databases and so on. And going forward also now, for example, all the traffic and the orders and the project and so on. So tied it to the AI ML capabilities that the public clouds provide, so the engines. But the second part is how you're actually managing now those resources and those EC2 and compute and other loads, and build the orchestration that can manage the VNFs or the CNFs running on the public cloud or running on the edge or running in the private network. We are also supporting in hybrid environment. So these are the two, I call it two angles that we are working. One, first of all, transition our platforms to be deployed in native way on the public cloud, but also being able to be an orchestration of those new loads or new functions, that some of them that now are much more distributed, and when we're talking about 5G, so it's much more dynamic. So some parts of them are running very close on the customer itself. So if it's in a private network scenario, some of them can run in the edge and some of them can run in the public cloud, and the customer is expecting that it will be very intuitive and we will manage it, let's say, seamlessly and without, let's say, impacting the service themselves.
Okay, so from there, I'm going to take the conversation to Gint. So Gint, when we spoke the other day, I was really interested in saying that SES was committed to using OnApp. But then when you looked at OnApp, it was a kind of sort of naked standard, really, and it hadn't been productized. And that's what made you start looking around for how are we going to handle this? How are we going to get the benefit of this framework, but actually deploy it realistically?
Yeah, so this was almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And really it was Microsoft, in our discussions with Microsoft, that they effectively brought Amdocs to the table and indicated that we could go with an all cloud-based solution for OnApp as a commercially supported product from Amdocs. And you know, the big concern was that we wanted a native Azure solution, and we wanted to grow into a complete solution that took advantage of all of the facilities that Azure would deliver as a service for us, because we would be biting off an awful lot. We really wanted to simplify our whole OSS BSS stack. So Amdocs diligently ported OnApp to use native Azure facilities, and we went down the path and purchased more OSS solutions from Amdocs. And again, those applications are supporting native Azure capabilities, and this was really interesting. I'll tell you, a whole suite of applications, once Amdocs optimized it and made it use native Azure facilities, our consumption went down 70%. it was fantastic. And this is something that Microsoft supported because even though consumption's going down because an application is running more optimally, Microsoft knows the result is going to be moving more workloads into the cloud, and that's exactly what we did. We purchased a few more OSS applications from Amdocs, along with our BSS, Dynamics, and ServiceNow, all running in the cloud. So right now our BSS and OSS is 100% in the cloud, running in Azure. And the last piece is what we want to move into Azure, and I'm not going to say the cloud, it's for the edge. We want all of the network management systems and satellite control systems that physically sit next to the gear at teleports and POPs. We want to put Azure Stack out there for our own use. So we're going to run those applications on there. And then we're also going to use that edge stack capability to serve our customers in addition to our own apps. So the OSS and BSS stack completely in the native Azure cloud. And now the next move is to get everything into Azure by bringing edge stack out to those locations where the applications need to run at the POPs and the teleports.
So when you're talking about services and applications for your customers, what sort of thing are you talking about, Gint?
Satellite connectivity and content distribution.
But 5G, 4G?
5G, up and coming in bits and pieces. This is another area where we're leaning very heavily on what Amdocs and Microsoft bring to the table. Microsoft's focused effort on space combined with Telco and the 5G core. We have a huge amount that we can tap to adopt solutions and solution components out of various acquisitions Microsoft has made that are quite exciting, like Metaswitch and Affirmed. And similarly, Amdocs has other solutions for us to increasingly start using. I'll give you an example. In satellite, it's pretty normal that a satellite operator develops their own mobility manager. It's not standardized, highly customized. This is an example of one area. There isn't too much that needs to be changed for the mobility manager. It just needs to be integrated, and the satellite equipment vendors need to support working with a mobility manager. When we get the industry to start paying attention, when we get the satellite equipment industry starting to pay attention to the 5G specs and the 3GPP specs, we're going to be able to move into a completely open SAT-RAN based environment. And for us, it's really Microsoft and Amdocs that are helping us adopt the standards, implement them in the cloud out at the edge, and then we just have to get the rest of the vendor ecosystem to join. And this is also something Microsoft is doing with Azure Orbital, virtualizing a lot of the satellite capabilities and the gateway infrastructure straight into the Azure cloud. And that means that SES can, instead of having a whole ground network and teleports, it means antennas get installed in an Azure data center. The RF comes in, and just like with the 5G terrestrial network, all of the software running on FPGAs is taking care of virtualizing what was all a hardware-based solution in the past.
You make this sound like it's been so easy.
It's pretty easy on paper.
Well,
I'll tell you that much. But beyond paper, it gets extremely messy.
So I'm going to go back to Moshe, and then I want to talk to Justin about big leaps. Moshe, I suspect that you disguise or handle a lot of the complicated stuff. It's part of your job working with Azure to take a lot of the difficulty of integration away. Is that right?
Yeah. So the way we're trying to reduce, this kind of complexity of integration is, first of all, to work with, standard APIs. So we build the solution, the OSS systems, the orchestration system, in such, first of all, in a modular way, but also supporting TMF and Etsy API, so both towards the southbound and northbound, the integration will be much more simple and will be less customized. Because that's also the expectation of the customers today. They want, even that we took in, as Gint mentioned, some parts of OnApp and we adapted some parts of the open source. The way we build the solution that it's to be so modular, so it's really kind of a Lego that you can go and replace and pick, and customers can go and actually choose and have different modules if they, for example, prefer to, let's say, to do some kind of adjustments. So this kind of having standard APIs, working on those business flow and supporting migration tools to customers. So when we are moving them from the one deployment to another, to the public cloud deployment, and when we're focusing about, for example, about in deployment in the edge, when I'm talking about, for example, homing and placement and so on. So we are providing a lot of automation tool that will make this kind of transformation and adoption much smoother.
Okay, so the open APIs, a great idea, but are they widely enough used? I mean, Gint's suggestion is that not really. And do you think that's going to change? And do you think at the moment it's a market inhibitor, that lack of plug and play?
Mr. Moshe, or anyone who wants to have a chat about it. Yeah, well, I think it's a good question, and it's one which hasn't sort of gone away. I had a role actually at TM Forum a few years ago looking at this as well. It's tough. I mean, there are certain APIs which are used more widely than others, but of course, it's all down to the execution ultimately. Even if you've got an API, those have been implemented somewhat differently, particularly in software, less so in the hardware, strangely enough, because it tends to work a bit better. But yeah, it's a starting point, and even if it's not working specifically, it's a really good starting point, if nothing else, from an integration perspective. But there are plenty of, it's like all things. There's plenty of APIs out there. It's just a matter of picking which ones you want to work with. The TM Forum are pretty good at doing this from an OSS BSS perspective, and certainly in terms of a starting point, it's a really good starting point. So I'm sort of advocate of them, but doesn't mean necessarily if you've got one API from one vendor and another, they're going to work smoothly. Is certainly the case. But I suppose the word of warning, and it's sort of interesting, from previous presentations on in this event, and certainly worth bearing in mind, just because you've ported something over, that porting exercise is not a trivial one, and certainly you can get wrapped up in very heavy use of, and certainly what Gint was talking about, of just a bad port can end up being very expensive if you're moving it to cloud. So you've got to be very careful how that's done. And certainly the support which the public cloud providers are now providing in that activity is absolutely critical in those porting exercises. Yes, I think Gint was saying it can mean that they're probably getting less money, but in the ultimately, it's going to make the whole thing far more viable. But that is where some of the work is done. And I've certainly seen bad examples of applications coming over and people being presented with fairly hefty public cloud infrastructure bills, shall we say, in that process. And that is certainly something which, I'm quite sure the likes of Amdocs are very hot onto in terms of ensuring that those are done correctly. But there's some flexibility coming down the line, and certainly, there are tools out there. Cloud Native Software Foundation has a number of elements which people have adopted, which is sort of open and portable and provide that sort of flexibility. So some of these complications are being taken away. But the flip side of that, it's certainly more complicated than it used to be. It used to be you'd have a bit of hardware, this is years back, you'd port your application to it and life was easy. It was all in your domain. Now you're looking at sort of different suppliers of different bits of that architecture, which inherently is more complicated, even though the net result is going to be a lot better. And as those tools become more sophisticated, and Azure have been doing this as well, some of that complication is being taken away, so that the effort involved with the porting and the implementation and deployment of applications onto those environments is becoming a lot easier than it used to be, less technical, shall we say, and the effort involved with that migration is a lot less. So there's work still to be done. but certainly everyone's leaning in the same direction in terms of making this it's mutually beneficial for application vendors, for operators, and for the public cloud providers to make these things a lot easier. As a consumer of those technologies, you just got to be a little bit cute that you aren't being painted into a corner, which is only provided by one of those cloud providers. So that's one of the things, you know, we talked about, sort of being multi-cloud compliant. So you can actually use a number of clouds. And I know that Amdocs is certainly aware of this, and certainly Azure is also providing tools which are more portable as well, available on other cloud platforms, not just their own. So some of these issues are sort of dissipating as we go through.
Yeah, I've really noticed that we talked about hybrid cloud for seems forever actually, but it feels like we're switching more to talking about multi-cloud. And I'd be really interested to hear what Rick and Moshe have to say, and how you're supporting that, and how you think that trend's going to expand or not. Rick, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can chime in on that one. So look, we recognize that every telco is quite heterogeneous. They've got every tool, every product ever developed, deployed somewhere within their organization. So our intent is to meet them where they are, right? So we recognize that they're going to be using Amazon, they may be using Google, they're definitely using Azure. And of course, on-prem, they may have their own private clouds, they have a lot of legacy, but they need to modernize, right? They do need to digitally transform these processes. And so our strategy is simple. We're going to make Azure services available anywhere you want them. Yes, that means they'll be available on competitor clouds, and that makes sense. And so
will you run competitor clouds on your cloud, if you see what I mean?
I'm talking about running Azure platform services, like cognitive services, like network services, potentially on another cloud, managed using the Azure management control plane, right? So the Azure Resource Manager will extend to your own hardware on premises. It will extend to AWS or Google or anywhere you want it via a product that we've launched called Azure Arc. And so it extends the management plane. It enables you to deploy these managed platform services anywhere you want them. And so that, you know, again, prevents that locking that a lot of ISVs and customers are concerned with, because it now enables you to, again, leverage other clouds if you need them. We also recognize that as telcos move towards virtualizing their network, as they start embracing cloud technologies, as they modernize their network infrastructure, they're going to have a lot of legacy there as well, right? And that's not going away overnight. And in many cases, you know, you just won't be able to get rid of that black box that you have in the corner. And so we want to introduce, you know, a means for managing those devices just as well. And so that's, you know, another part of the equation. We've also unpacked a lot of stuff around APIs, and that also plays, you know, a role here, right? Because we do embrace open APIs. We found that they actually work quite well around the networking stack. And so, for example, the 3GPP has done a great job ensuring that if I have a packet core from a firm, it works just fine with an IMS from Avenir or from another ISV, right? So those networking APIs have been quite established, and we found that they work quite well. Where they do tend to break is when you start moving up the stack towards applications. And so, for example, you know, your OSS applications, you know, tend to have very proprietary APIs. BSS applications are now kind of shifting towards adapting things like the TM Forum open digital architecture, which promotes the use of open APIs. And that has helped a lot. And so we work with a variety of ISVs, you know, Amdocs included, that ultimately, you know, we'll start shifting in that direction to, you know, become more open and interoperable with other, you know, applications in a mechanism very similar to what the 3GPP has done on the network. And so hopefully, you know, that's what we'll be. But yeah, absolutely, multi-cloud is where we're going. We expect that Azure will take the lion's share of that multi-cloud revenue, because at the end of the day, you know, we're really the only hyperscaler that has made a huge commitment to telcos as a customer, telcos as a partner, with the acquisition that Gint, you mentioned, the firm, the Metaswitch last year, which really allowed us to form this Azure for Operators group, which is really laser focused on telcos as customers and partners, in making Azure the industry's first carrier-grade cloud. And when we say that, we mean it. We understand what carrier-grade means. We've acquired significant telco DNA from Affirmed and from Metaswitch. These are hundreds of telco software engineers, network engineers that truly understand the unique requirements of telcos, that have been building products, telco products, virtual network functions, targeted at telcos for many years. And we're infusing all of that knowledge into our Azure team, again, with the goal that, again, we'll create a carrier cloud, not only suitable for IT and OSS and BSS workloads, but for network workloads as well, the most critical workloads that telcos have.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up something you said a little bit earlier, which is as you move up the stack and get closer to the BSS and OSS, that's where things break. And I guess that's where Amdocs comes in, right?
So it does, and again, we're now just seeing progress in standardizing, again, interoperability between the various different BSS applications, whether it be billing or charging or mediation or catalog or anything else. And so we'll see success there as well. We've actually run a lab where we've implemented basically an instance of the open digital architecture. We're working with the TM Forum and joining that initiative that they have as well, and it's just a matter of basically testing these vendor solutions to ensure, again, this interoperability does exist. We do provide a product called Azure API Management, which is basically a gateway or I would say like a service broker that easily enables us to translate between a proprietary API and an open API that's part of the API definitions that the TM Forum has published. And so it's a great way for, again, retrofitting a lot of those legacy applications that you may not have the code for, the vendors may no longer be around, but we can still bring them into this new ecosystem and allow them to modernize and be managed and interoperable, just like a brand new application.
Okay, Moshe, do you just want to add? We're getting close to the end of our session. Is there anything that you'd like to add here, and especially when the BSS and OSS gets tricky as you get up to the applications at the top of the stack? That's the end you look after, right?
Yeah. So just to add to what Rick mentioned, and I fully agree about when we're talking about hybrid, I think that I see what we are seeing working with customers, we see actually 3 dimensions. One was about in the past, if it was just about I have my private cloud and I have my public cloud, and I want now to go to migrate and to shift loads from one to another. Second dimension was now about customers are expecting that they can be connected to, for example, to Azure and AWS simultaneously, and they're expecting from us that the orchestration will be able to do backup, restore, shifting loads and so on, and everything should be done automatically and simultaneously, and to do because different of reasons. And the third one is about if in the past it was I have my loads running somewhere in the cloud, dozens of miles or hundreds of kilometers from my site. Now when it's coming for telco, because all the edge requirements, the low latency and other applications, the expectation now that the orchestration system and the management system will be able to manage the loads and to take smart decision with a very strong algorithm where to run the load. And again, it has to be very transparent. So I find now, and this is why both Azure and also we know in AWS with Outposts and wavelengths are coming and really pushing the cloud actually to the access. And the expectation from us, from Amdocs, is that the orchestration solution will be able to, let's say, in a very simple automated way to go and actually to run and to understand where to run the load, to spin off the load in a different location when there is an understanding that something happened in the network. And if again, we're talking about the Telcos. So if it's not meeting the requirement or the SLA, I need now to take those decisions and then shift the loads from the edge, much more closer to the site, and vice versa. So this is actually the 3 dimension. And so when I'm talking about hybrid, it's not just about private versus public, it's also about now I can run it in the core, in the edge, in the side, and it has to be fully transparent.
Okay.
So I think that's a real evolution. And when talking about 5G, this is one of the changes, because in 5G, let's say beside let's say the fact that it's talking about a new RAN and so on, but it's a fact that it's much more dynamic. Because if in 4G it was much more static, I had my RAN, I had my backhaul, I virtualized the core, but the functions themselves were not so were not really dynamic. Now we're talking about separation of the control plane and the data plane and breaking it up. And now I can now move and shift the loads. That's become, I call it, one of the tricky points. And then you need a very strong orchestration systems. And together, this is the cooperation that we are doing with Azure, and we are part of their ecosystem, and we are running part of their marketplace. So we're giving to the customer the option to go and actually to support these use cases.
Okay, so we have a question. I'm not sure who is most appropriate to answer this. How will the service management transitioning to the cloud infrastructure, how will it be managed? This means the IT organization sort of letting go, taking their hands off it during the migration or after the migration. What do you think? Is it about the IT taking their hands off within the operator?
How about Gint? What's happened, Gint?
I was just thinking he's done it, so he should be the best person to answer. Yes. How did it feel when you let go of your IT, Gint?
Good.
For me, it felt good, but I don't think everyone shared the same sentiment.
All right.
Definitely, you know, I think that the big thing is to get as much standard capabilities that come from the cloud and advanced services. Let the cloud provider, you know, give that to us. And we should be focusing on our efforts and our resources and our investments in areas that are going to build differentiators. Something that one of our partners doesn't do at scale and doesn't specialize in. So for a satellite provider to try and produce cloud scale performance of IT services, it doesn't make sense on the surface of it. So, you know, clearly I think that this is sort of the universal principle: get the best solution from the best partner so that you can focus and do your thing.
I think if I read between the lines in that question, it tends to refer to maybe the displacement of a lot of IT resources as you move to the cloud. This is a big concern that virtually every IT organization has. In my experience, that doesn't really happen, right? So what ultimately happens is that there's a new skill set that's required for you to successfully move to the cloud, right? There's a lot of complexity. Let's not, hide that. There's a lot of new technology. There's a lot of new paradigms as you move to the cloud, but that doesn't mean that, you're not going to need resources to do that, right? So what the cloud does, it standardizes a lot of things. It removes, a lot of the infrastructure management side of things, right? So I don't have to go and build servers, rack and stack them in my own data center. It does, removes a lot of the operational expenditure of running that data center and keeping it, the lights on. But the reality is that you still need technologies. You still need, deeply technical IT resources that can go and create those cloud resources, manage consumption of those cloud resources as mentioned over time. You want to iterate over what you've done to continue to reduce, that consumption. There's plenty to do in service management and IT work as you move to the cloud. Let's not hide that.
Yeah, and I would say that one advantage from an IT's staff perspective is that their skills, of course, are then applicable to a far larger audience than their internal one. So, just from a purely selfish point of view, there's some good reasons to go and learn some of this stuff, which might be beneficial for them as well.
Well, as Gint says, the next step is not just about for SES's sake, but what it can offer customers, right, directly. So, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to say we're out of time. I think that was great. And thank you all for your input. Really interesting.
No problem.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much indeed.